Joel, this is our year-end World Discord podcast, isn't it?
It is our year-end World Discord podcast, Brian. That was hard to say. Hi, and we're recording on a Saturday. We had some technical difficulties earlier in the week, which I guess we'll try and sort out after the new year.
Excellent.
How you doing this Saturday morning?
I'm doing good, and the world's a mess.
Yeah, I'm doing a mess, and the world's a mess. So today, our listeners and viewers might notice that we don't have a guest with us. We're going to do a year-end wrap-up of the various discords around the globe, some of which we've covered already, and some of which have popped up since our last episode even. So not entirely sure exactly where this is going to go, but we're sort of going to catch up on the major conflicts going on and what we might expect next year.
Sounds good. Congratulations. Congratulations are in order to us. This is our 24th episode. Who would have thought we'd actually keep this going this long?
I had my doubts. Fortunately, there's plenty of Discord in the world.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right. So, if you remember, if you've been listening to us all the way back, our first episode was the various things happening in the world. So, we thought we'd recap that. But let's start with a couple of new ones that just popped up in the last week or two. The first is the Syrian civil war has restarted. I don't know that anybody expected this before a couple weeks ago. And not only has it restarted, but Bashar al-Assad regime looks like they're in trouble.
It's really declining fast. Like it came out of nowhere with such rapid success by this. What are they? A rebel group? Like I don't even recognize the name from a decade ago when Syria was hot. Like it's really out of nowhere.
I think we're calling them a rebel group right now because nobody knows what's really
happening. They are, yeah. But they must be pretty large and well trained and well armed because to capture Aleppo in like an hour and a half is not easy. And they continue to move. I think the most significant signal for me, I don't know how you take it, Brian, but that Assad's days are numbered is. Yesterday, Iran started withdrawing its diplomatic corps, told civilians to get out and is helping to evacuate them, and is removing elements of the Quds Force, the externally deployed Revolutionary Guard, and other military assets, all pulling them all out of Syria. I find that stunning.
Absolutely. I was literally saying yesterday morning that Assad's best chance is if he keeps Russia and Iran's support. And by yesterday afternoon and this morning, we're hearing that Iran is basically, pulling out and leaving him to his own devices. Assad wouldn't be here right now if he was left to his own devices 10 years ago. When the war was going on. So I think we'll see what Russia does, but they're mostly acting as his air force, is my understanding. They don't have much on the ground to help him. And also the Kurds took a major city in the north that Assad had been holding. So things are falling apart very fast.
Very fast. What I've heard is that Russian air assets have hit some targets in Aleppo, but I haven't heard anything beyond that. What's your? It's so fresh, so new that I don't think we have anything we're going to say is speculative.
Right.
But how do you take the timing? For me, I see it as capitalizing on essentially the decapitation of Hezbollah and the dramatic weakening of Hezbollah due to the conflict with Israel. And basically, Hezbollah is waving the white flag with this ceasefire that seems to be holding. They were a major supporter of Assad's regime through Iran, obviously. But all of that had to have been a signal. The weakening of Hezbollah had also to be a signal of some element of Iran's weakening support for Hezbollah and thus for Syria, and then Russia, of course, being tied down badly in the
Right.
debacle of Ukraine that
That,
we'll get to later.
I
That's
think the
the way
biggest
I see it.
surprise to me is the Iranian pullback because I think your discussion is right in terms of the points of detail. Neither one of us is a deep expert on this. I've got some decent information, but certainly not up to date. But this is one of those. Iran had two key allies in the region,
Yeah,
and they were Syria and Hezbollah.
yeah,
And the fact that Iran is pulling back from both of them, I wonder if this is something where someone is backing the rebels or if there's someone talking to Iran. And if there's a possibility, the Saudis and the Iranians had started to have talks a couple months ago.
yeah.
And literally hadn't thought of this till we started this conversation. But one possibility, I'm just literally throwing it out, is this is Iran in the background pulling back its support to make deals more palatable with other countries and to make it possible that Iran can start normalizing relations someplace. That would be a very, very strange outcome that started with the Israeli invasion, with October 7th and Hamas attacking Israel, Israel going into Gaza, Israel going into Lebanon against Hezbollah, Iran and Israel trading tiny attacks, pinprick attacks back and forth just to basically show their manhood and put up the military there. But I think that's one possibility that's out there. I don't know who would be backing these Syrian rebels right now. We certainly haven't heard anything about the
Yeah.
U.S., and I don't know anything about the Saudis doing it or anything else.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Who is supporting those rebels? But I would add to what you were just saying. Yes, Israel and Iran traded a few flurries of missile attacks on each other. Those were also accompanied by pretty intensive diplomacy involving the United States, Qatar, and others
Absolutely.
uh, to contain that conflict, and indeed to contain the conflict between Israel and Lebanon. That also those negotiations involved Iran. So who knows? Maybe there's some recognition of that it could be beneficial to Iran to cool things down prior to the next Trump administration taking
Oh,
office. There could be
well,
considerations of that as well.
certainly, yeah. No, that's a good point too. And the Saudis have been suspiciously quiet. They are between a rock and a hard place in the Israel situation because they were close to making peace, and now that's been pushed off by the Hamas attack and by what's gone on since. And in that time, they start talking to Iran, and far from peace in Yemen or any place else, but a lessening of verbal tensions at the very least there. Who knows what's happening behind the scenes and if they're using cutouts or just private diplomacy to talk through these things.
Sort of who knows what history will tell us, uh, but sort of the
Call the show, who knows?
but sort of the positive side conspiracy theory. I wonder, in an effort to broker a longer term settlement between Israel and Palestine. Clearly, the Biden administration, since October 7th, um, has succeeded in bringing together a wide range of states in the region who would be necessary to guarantee a peace, a recognition that the United States and the UK can't do that alone, that meaningful peace requires participation of Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, the Saudis, the Emirates, really all of the states in the region.
Right.
If that's happening, those states in the region have more of an ability um, to join Iran in such a broader settlement. I mean, this is looking extremely positively, but but were that to be the case, that could have long term positive implications
Yeah,
for the future.
You know what? We had talked a little bit about doing the new stuff for Syria and South Korea. I'm going to suggest we hold off South Korea here. Let's stick in this region because we're getting to the broad implications for the region. We can keep working Syria in and working Iran in. Let's
Yeah,
talk Lebanon for a minute,
for sure.
though, and just how quickly everything happened. We're talking about 2 months, ever since October 7th, over a year ago. Hezbollah and Israel have been in a low level war, but Hezbollah and Israel are often in a low level war where things are going across the border each way. And then we get to Israel both doing some preceding attacks. We had the Pager show and talked about that. The Pager show. A great battle of half wits.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
which we both went at it. After that, Israel invades and Israel goes into Lebanon.
yeah.
Israel apparently has destroyed a significant amount of Hezbollah's ability to fight, a significant amount of Hezbollah's leadership. They've also been accused of attacking a lot of civilians and a lot of aid workers and a lot of healthcare workers who were not necessarily a part of Hezbollah. Hezbollah not Lebanon. They are very different. Hezbollah is an element and has control in the south, but Israel's attacked the capital, and Hezbollah has limited control and limited presence in the capital. So,
Oh, but they
it,
did have party headquarters because Hezbollah does have presence in the Lebanese government and the Lebanese parliament, and
they did.
nobody
Absolutely.
questioned that the
And
buildings
we
they
heard
hit
about
were
we
Hezbollah
heard
areas.
about too many ambulances and
Yeah,
emergency
yeah,
responders and
of course,
others
of
who
course.
were also attacked. So, yes, both sides are there. But then they go into a ceasefire deal. And as you said already, it's been fairly successful, a few violations, but this is, a war between Israel and neighbors. When are there not a few violations? Nothing that either side is saying is putting it over the top. So we look like, in no small part because Israel deteriorated Hezbollah's ability to fight, we look like we may be getting a ceasefire there, which also puts more pressure on Hamas and
Well,
puts more pressure on Israel there.
but let's not minimize and it raises a lot of questions. How there's no doubt that Israel dramatically eroded Hezbollah's
Yeah.
capabilities in Lebanon, but there's also, and we have talked about this
Netanyahu,
before.
Netanyahu has got a public relations boost in Israel that's probably reasonably well deserved on that. That was a
For sure.
thorn in Israel's side, and he actually did something the Israeli people certainly view as very positive there.
But let's not forget that, and we have discussed this on this podcast before. Hezbollah is much larger than Hamas, much more heavily armed and with more modern, sophisticated weaponry than Hamas.
Right.
Much more widely diversified geographically, deeper political and societal, what would you say, connections
Right.
in Lebanon. All of that, just a much more established, sophisticated, modern, and larger entity than Hamas. And in 2 months, Israel didn't just decapitate Hezbollah, they seem to have incapacitated it largely, at least
Well,
militarily.
and that's one of the things that
That's
I don't remember if we talked about it on the show, but I've certainly been saying, and the experts have been saying for a long time, it's not just me. One of the reasons Hezbollah was hesitant about going in full force against Israel was everything you just described is accurate and made them much more vulnerable than Hamas. They are not a terrorist organization in the way that Hamas is.
They're not
They
exclusively right. Yeah,
they
yeah,
are set to fight a potential heads up war,
yeah.
but they don't have the power that the Israeli military does.
Right.
Heads up war, Israel was going to take out a lot of their stuff. And lo and
Yeah.
behold, Israel preemptively took out
A lot.
a lot of side attacks back and forth,
Yeah,
took
yeah.
out a lot of their stuff. So that was something that, yeah, they were better armed, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're more equipped to fight one of the strongest militaries in the world.
And perhaps Iran has realized that the destruction of Hamas and the destruction of Hezbollah, now at least their military capacity, maybe it's given Iran some, maybe we're not as good as that. There's a lot of resources that Iran has expended to arming those groups. And Iran's got its own domestic problems, massive domestic political problems. And I have said for decades, Iran is in many ways the most rational actor in the Middle East. In many ways,
rational or irrational?
Rational.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely.
And very protective of its own regime and its rule at home. That's always their priority.
Yeah, and I want to be clear to our listeners here. Rational and evil can go together. This is one problem Americans have. We tend to think that evil, when we see evil acts, they're irrational. That's just not true.
Not true.
Evil people throughout history can be incredibly rational, and the most successful ones are amazingly, take Stalin, amazingly rational at what they do. So
I've always said, Osama bin Laden is one of the most trustworthy individuals the world has known. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said, and he carried out those things. And if the U.S. had pulled our bases out of Saudi Arabia, probably the Twin Towers would still be standing. So, rational does not mean good necessarily. Yeah, but anyway, this Syria situation, how it plays out is going to, and Lebanon, but it's going to have, this is going to be major news in 2025.
I've got absolutely no idea how the Syrian rebels feel about Israel and how they feel about the Palestinians. Do they support the Palestinians? Will they work with Israel as Qatar and Saudi Arabia have started doing? What's the deal? Will they turn into another Jordan or Egypt where they make peace very quickly if they take control? So I don't think we know.
Feel about the Kurds. We don't know any of this. Right.
So all significant. All right, so I think that takes us, we can talk more Lebanon again too, but I think that takes us to Hamas
and Gaza.
Gaza, and then more broadly, the Palestinian people and the West Bank and what's going to happen there. I think that between Hezbollah losing that part of the war, between what's happening in Syria and no Syrian support, between Iran pulling back their support, between the fact that Hamas has been largely defanged and among its own people discredited, and the fact that Israeli has effectively wiped out any Palestinian structure in Gaza, and that Israel has now been consistently attacking in the West Bank. Notice the story that I'm building here. I think Palestine and Palestinians, not just Hamas, are in for a world of hurt. And you mentioned peace settlement earlier. I can absolutely see a quote unquote peace settlement where the Palestinians are cut out of the table, especially if it happens under Trump, since the last attempts at settlement all left the Palestinians on the side and didn't even bother to talk to Palestinian people at all. Netanyahu certainly doesn't want to work with the Palestinian Authority. He was closer to Hamas than he was to the Palestinian Authority. But I can see a Gaza that is just either chaos or under light Israeli military control. I doubt Israel actually bothers to turn it into a real concentration camp. If anything, I would think they put light security in and pull themselves out and let everything fall apart, which is
or absorb it into Israel proper and just make up proper.
Is that possible? Yes, but I'm not sure they want it. I think it's more of a situation.
Well, they got settlers moving everywhere else. Why not have settlers settle there?
The settlers in Gaza, and they kicked them out for the political reason of giving the Palestinians someplace to live. What's better for the nasty religious conservative elements of Israel than letting the Palestinians have their place to live after you make it unlivable? That's kind of the thing. I have incredible sympathy for the Israeli people. I think the Israeli people deserve to live in freedom and to live in security. But I think there are a few people on the top of the religious conservative movement in Netanyahu who just not only don't give a damn about the Palestinians, but are happy to see them in the worst possible straits and think they
give a damn about them in absolutely the wrong way. And I'm worried about expanded incursions or even occupation of the West Bank, or turning the West Bank into the next Gaza, blockading it, and
the military doesn't even have to go in. They can just keep
No,
standing at the side
correct.
while the Israeli civilians, who are often heavily armed, go in and commit the acts that we've heard about over the
Yeah,
last 9 months or so.
yeah,
Israeli civilian attacks have gotten worse, and it takes hours for the Israeli military to reply. And the chief of the unit, the Israeli military that's in the West Bank, is one of the leading religious figures in
yeah,
Netanyahu's coalition, and
yeah,
it's just all really bad for Palestinian civilians right now. It
yeah.
looks so much more horrific than it did before October 7th.
And clearly, the election of Donald Trump makes things so much worse.
Absolutely.
The prospects so much worse for the Palestinian people. I do wonder, and maybe I'm not sure what the point of the exercise would be, but I was thinking, if everything else that has happened over the last couple months stayed the same, Syria, Hezbollah, all of that, but either the Biden administration were to continue, or if Harris had won the election and basically the same foreign policy team had held, um, how much better the situation could be potentially for the Palestinians. I don't know. It depends how effective and how strong U.S. pressure would have been on Israel, but
Right.
certainly the situation would have been different.
I'm not sure, and Trump is so transactional. It's just hard to say where he'll go on any given day. I'm guessing it's going to be bad. We're guessing it's going to be bad for the Palestinians, but he goes back and forth so often it's not funny. I
I don't
do want to reiterate the tiny idealistic possible good news for Palestine that I've said in a previous show, and I still think it is out there, just incredibly unlikely. If Israeli leaders, Netanyahu's not the person, but if Israeli leadership actually wanted to solve this, what
know.
they could do right now is make a massive effort to rebuild Palestine and to
Yeah,
rebuild the Gaza Strip.
yep,
They
we've
could
talked.
announce it, they could start to fund it, they could get the Saudis and Qatar and other Egypt and Jordan certainly involved. They
And the
could pay for
Palestinians
it.
themselves,
Yeah,
right?
and absolutely. And they can do what you're actually supposed to do with counterinsurgency, according to every respectable military agency in the world, including
Yeah,
the U.S. You're supposed to go after hearts and minds and
correct.
build infrastructure and bring the people to your side. I
Yep,
think the Israelis have a better opportunity to do that right now than they have ever had, because they deteriorated Hezbollah, because they deteriorated Hamas,
right.
because of Iran pulling out of the region. I don't think they're going to do it.
They're going to
But
do
if
it.
anybody actually wanted to end the occupation that's been going on since 1967, now could be an ideal time to do it, especially with the Saudis and the Qataris and potentially the Emirates being willing to move toward peace with Israel.
Yeah,
This could be the fig leaf for peace, that Israel says, come on in and help us rebuild. That also keeps Israeli soldiers out. You let Saudi
correct.
and Qatari soldiers go in, not as military, but as police, and ask them in Egypt to please
Peacekeepers. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yep,
And ask them to help out. Not that the Saudis and the Qataris give the slightest damn about the Palestinian people. As all my Arab and Palestinian friends tell me,
yep.
they've known since the 60s and
Right.
since the PLO formed in
Even as
'64.
them.
This is, again, it's transactional on their side. What do
Yep.
they get out of it?
Right.
And if there's something to get out of it, the Saudis would certainly help there, and others would
Yeah.
certainly help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you and I agree on this. Like,
Yeah, if policymakers are listening to us, that idea is for free. That's, take that one.
I think for at least in the Biden administration, I have no doubt this isn't hard to figure out, right? Like I tell my students all the time, since October 7th, it's not hard to draw up what a long standing peace looks like now. It's quite straightforward. The only question, does anybody want it?
Right.
Meaning the Israelis or the representatives of the Palestinians.
I'm going to change that. Does anybody in power want
In
it?
power. Yeah, the representatives in Israel and the representatives of the Palestinians. Do they want it?
You just said to the Palestinian people and to the Israeli people
Oh,
as well.
100%. Yeah, it'd be 90% yes. Yeah, yeah,
Huge. Yeah, it
yeah.
wouldn't be 100% Israel. There'd be 10 or 20% who
Yeah.
would really we hate it, but
the illegal settlers in particular might they won't fare so well. But yeah, it would be overwhelming on both sides, and it's pretty easy to drop, and it would include, like what you said, Israel, heavily involved in the rebuilding, and as I put it, my shorthand, establishing commerce, because in the end, a Palestinian state next to an Israeli state, their prospects for peace depend on thriving commerce across whatever that border looks like.
now, then the other hand, though, we're going to go another hand again. Then we can get off of this because there are too many other hands. That a new ambassador that Trump wants to put in Israel. What's his name again?
Mr. Asshole.
Dude, you're not supposed to say that.
I can't remember who it is, but I know the roster of people Trump has named, and they're all Mr. or Mrs. Asshole. So,
old age moment. The former governor of Arkansas, his daughter's now the governor.
Huckabee.
Possible Ambassador Huckabee, just to make sure everybody realizes, is one of our friendly evangelical apocalyptics. And Ambassador Huckabee, according to his religious
He's not ambassador yet, please. But he's going to be.
Ambassador Huckabee. He's going to pass. I have no doubt about it, unfortunately. A lot of other people might not, but he's going to. But, he wants it all to go up in flames because that'll bring the end times.
Yeah.
And he's clear about this. And Steve Bannon is clear about this. Other people in the potential Trump administration are clear about this. This is an undertone of American evangelicalism. Not all evangelicals in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of the heavily religious political people are on Israel's side, not because they love Israel, but because they love about the end times.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about that enough in public, and it's huge. That this is you think about how people might bring their religious beliefs into politics. What could be bigger than bringing about the end times? And you don't want peace in the Middle East for that. That's not anything that group is interested in.
No, it's ugly, and that's definitely troubling.
Yeah.
And then how does even Israel respond to an ambassador like that? Because it's not like the Israelis are favorable to that evangelical.
Well, they don't talk about it in their diplomacy side. They talk about that in front of friendly groups. But I think Huckabee and Netanyahu, if Huckabee's in, become best buds. I think they have a really easy time together in that new embassy in Jerusalem and working out of there.
Yeah. There's a lot of hands, as you've said.
Go to something more fun. You want to go to Ukraine or you want to go to South Korea next?
No, let's save South Korea for last. Ukraine. Just today, it was announced that Ukraine received the second delivery of F-16s from Denmark. I think that means all but 4 of the F-16s that Ukraine has received have come from Denmark. They made the announcement with a pretty strong, almost passive-aggressive comment about the lack of F-16s and shortage of munitions from the Allies over recent months. It was quite interesting. There is some evidence over the last couple weeks of at least a stalling of what had been incremental Russian advances, both in the east and in the Kursk region. Ukraine has recaptured some of the villages that Russia had recaptured. I don't know. It's too much back and forth. Russia had made some advances towards reclaiming some of that territory in the Kursk region, but Ukraine has pushed the Russians back with some new toys that they have developed on their own. They have developed longer range drone rockets. The line between a rocket and a drone seems to be getting quite blurry. Some of these 500-mile drones, why don't we just call them cruise missiles at this point? But anyway, they developed their own.
drones, since we started weaponizing, there's surveillance that doesn't have
Yeah.
weapons. There's drones that go boom, which are rocket
Yeah.
drones effectively, but they've been
Yeah.
getting better. And then there's drones that deliver weaponry, and the
And
drone
then they
stays
come
there.
back. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But these ones that they developed that have like a 500-mile range, they're like cruise missiles,
Yeah.
and it's double the range of the longest rockets that the United States has provided. And the
It doesn't include the new longer range rockets, though, does it? I thought those are
200
longer.
miles.
Oh, they are. Okay.
200 miles. Hmm.
Okay.
And what Ukraine is developing is a range of just shy of 500 miles.
Okay.
That gets you close to Moscow. Again, I don't think Ukraine has any intention of hitting anything other than military and ammunitions and energy sites that support the war. They can't afford to. But it reflects the recognition that of what Ukraine has been saying for months and months and months, that they're going to continue to get pummeled if they can't strike the places where Russia keeps its weaponry and keeps the fuel and other logistical supplies that support the military effort. So if they are able to rapidly produce these rocket drones, and the suggestion is that in 2025 they'll be able to produce something on the order of 250,000 of them.
Yep.
That if they work, right, if they're accurate and they go boom where they're supposed to, and they're not easily shot down,
Right.
that can make a huge difference because Russia is they would be extremely vulnerable in that case.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things I think here will be what's the intelligence like? I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know that any of us know what level of intelligence the U.S. has been sharing with Ukraine in terms of satellites or other things, what level the Europeans have been sharing. But can they keep up intelligence if Russia starts moving some things around or otherwise? Because yeah, if they can hit that stuff, that's more significant than battlefield victories in a lot of ways for them. The bigger picture, though, seems to be assuming that Trump does what he says, we're going to go down to negligible amounts of munitions going to Ukraine, and he's going to be pushing for a deal. So, what does Europe do? And does Europe quietly tell Ukraine, you better take the deal now? And then what does the deal look like? I think one of the most recent considerations is if Ukraine has to give up territory, do they get a admission into NATO, which is one of the few things that might guarantee that Russia would have a harder time coming back in a couple of years and going back in again? Because Ukraine certainly doesn't want to give up Crimea or give up the Donbas region, Eastern territories, but it might be a better answer in the short and long term for the Ukrainian people. Not a good answer in any way, shape, or form, and it, but basically puts Russian aggression into a form where they win. But does Ukraine get that NATO guarantee that makes it less likely that the Russians can do it again and will dare to do it again?
It would require NATO to actually station bases on Ukrainian territory and integrate NATO weaponry into Ukraine's
Yep.
military, and that's going to be a big hill to climb. That's number one. I do. Part of what we need to know is exactly what is included in the sum. I think the number was $600 million of munitions the United States says it is rushing to Ukraine before January 20th. Will they, we really? The deliveries have been so slow over the 2 years, but clearly there's been about 5 months of organizing for this. I keep checking with the Institute of the Study of War. They will be the first to have some kind of breakdown about what is included in that and how much has actually gone. But the European Union states, allies, have been quite clear that if the United States slows or stops its munitions provision, that Europe doesn't have the ability to step in and meet Ukraine's needs.
No, that's huge because as we
Yeah.
talked about before, before, Germany's the next closest, and
Correct.
Germany's a year and a half, 2 years away from
Right.
making enough artillery shells
Right.
to meet current needs.
Right.
So
Right.
they just don't have the stuff.
Right. And so then that would beg the question then what incentive does Putin have to negotiate if he sees an opening to his initial objective, which was to basically eliminate Ukraine as a state? Um, could Russia actually succeed in that? Um, if Ukraine is no longer receiving the support it had been. So, what is Russia's incentive to negotiate at all becomes a
Right.
big question. And why would they tolerate a NATO member, Ukraine, when they see the prospects for making there not be Ukraine
Yeah,
at all?
and
So,
both Germany and France have talked about potentially upping the ante if the worst case happens. If that kind of thing is rejected. But does that mean they send troops into Ukraine, which is probably what it would take, not to physically stop the Russians, but to threaten them enough that they would get back to the table?
hard to see that happening. By all by actions, it would seem the more likely who feel the need more urgently would be the Scandinavian
Right.
countries, Finland and Denmark and Sweden, which right have been the Finland and Sweden demanded inclusion into NATO. Denmark is supplying the F-16s. Finland has supplied an inordinate percentage of its armaments.
Right.
I think Sweden gave its entire air force to Ukraine or something like
Right.
that several months ago. They gave all of. There was a declaration, an announcement that they were giving them all of something, and I can't remember what it was, but I think it was all their fighter planes, something like
Okay.
insane. So that urgency is real, although quietly sort of publicized.
Right.
And it doesn't take a genius to look at an atlas and figure out why they're so concerned. One would think that Poland. What's disconcerting is what seems to be the move to the extreme right in Romania. Uh, what is that going to foretell? But they
And
seem to be going
the isolationist right too.
along with Hungary and Slovakia. So all of that is very concerning
Yeah.
and must be concerning for the European Union. What like this Zelensky has been right all along. This conflict holds unpredictable consequences for the European Union and unity there. And it is shaking it, which is ultimately that is the underlying goal that Putin has had since
Yep.
coming to power 25 years ago.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's
All
really
right. On that happy side, where do we want to go next?
well. I think that in somewhat less straightforward way, the events in South Korea um, touch on that discussion of the right wing movements in Europe and in the United States and what that means for the stability and unity of the democracies. Um, so last week, Korea's president, who had been wildly unpopular and had difficulty getting any of his priorities through the legislature, declared martial law overnight and sent um, special forces to occupy the parliament building and deployed military. Both the military and the special forces responded to those orders with deployments. Um,
Which
and
wasn't certain. That was it. Which wasn't certain.
which was
That
not
could have gone either way. Yeah.
um, and while no shots were fired, images of the South Korean brutal dictatorship that lasted till the 1980s and the violent student protests there and crackdown of journalism. The point is that South Korean people rose up courageously and in inspiring ways with mass protests, and the parliament, which is has a fractured opposition that controls the majority in the parliament. In other words, it's not a single opposition party. There are deep divisions between the opposition parties, but together they control a majority. in, I think it's a 300-seat parliament. The president's party has something like 110 of those seats. They unanimously passed a law that nullified the declaration of martial law, and the military retreated to the barracks.
Yeah.
The defense minister resigned. The special forces retreated to the barracks. I think their commander also resigned, or at least ceded authority temporarily. I think that was the first. I can't remember what happened in
Yeah,
the
that
end.
was,
But today, the vote on impeachment failed because the president's party boycotted. So they didn't vote against impeachment. They simply refused to partake. So there was not a sufficient quorum to even hold a vote on impeachment. Basically, the session fizzled because the opposition was unable to convince the president's party to return to the chambers. So things hang in limbo. My guess, because the leader of that party in the parliament quite publicly called on the president to step down. My guess is the party is going to try to pressure him quietly, sort of a la the Republican Party with Nixon in 1973, to convince him his days are numbered and then he needs to go.
yeah.
And so a little bit hangs in the balance right now politically in South Korea. And I do think the outcome it will be important. The democracies of the world are certainly
Yeah,
watching.
I see this one as a very interesting test for democracy, both in South Korea, but also what could happen in other places. And is there a demonstration effect one way or another? This could make people who want to do that less likely, depending on how it turns out, or it could embolden some others in many right wing movements across the world right now in democratic countries. But to me, this is a someone in charge of a democracy. As you said, South Korea was a dictatorship through the 80s. South Korea was a developmental dictatorship. They built up the country. They effectively became a democracy because the dictators built a strong enough economy that they got a middle class, and
And
they had
the students toppled that.
no, absolutely. Well, you don't have students without a middle class. You don't have that education
Right,
system.
right.
You're building up the education system
Yeah.
is the interesting part of it. So I look at that as a very successful developmental dictatorship that eventually ran itself out of power and slowly became a well-functioning democracy and has now had democratic problems, as many states are having. And I think we're in the middle of the crisis. I don't know that we can say we're at the end of it, but this
No,
is a
not at
crisis
all.
of democracy that we all need to be watching, because the people who want to be autocrats are, and the
But
people
what I
who
think we need, what the American people need, and I don't see it happening, and I'm very pessimistic that it will. Um, the South Korean people have a close enough, they have direct memory of the murderous brutality of that dictatorship. Um, and and what was inspiring to me was the swift and courageous and resolute rejection of a return to anything like that. Although the president's party did not stay and vote to impeach, they did unanimously reject the power grab. And my first thought was uh, Donald Trump on the campaign trail, not just once, pretty much on a daily basis at every rally, um, articulated positions of a dictator, calling opposition media enemies of the people, promising, not threatening, promising to round up and carry out revenge against those who have opposed him politically, Republicans and Democrats alike. He's named many of the people that he's promised to go after. And he has now appointed to people in the security services, FBI, Justice Department, Defense Department, CIA, elsewhere, uh, individuals who support that authoritarian agenda.
right,
And
and going below that, the Project 2025 has a list of candidates for all
I
the mid
everyone who doesn't support it in the civil service.
right.
So that brings me to my thought during these events over the last few days. What are the odds that the American, like, suppose Trump tried to issue something equivalent to martial law, and closing down media, or rounding up opposition politicians, or trying to deploy special forces to cities that are dominated by Democratic politicians. I can imagine it. And I think Americans have, even those who oppose Trump, have been scared to imagine him doing what essentially he's promised, and in some cases specifically promised to do. Would the American people respond the way the Koreans have? And more important, could you suppose he tried to declare martial law, suspend the Constitution, and declare himself a dictator? Just pretend. What are the odds that a joint session of Congress would have a unanimous act of Congress rejecting that?
So two things. The odds are low that there would be a unanimous act. It's possible in this current Congress, depending on how they word it, it could even pass. I think, though, and we need to have somebody on to talk about this one, that the more important question is civil-military relations.
Yeah.
And I think the U.S. military is still largely in a position where they would not take action, and where they would reject that. I hope this is not just wishful thinking, but we also know Trump, and expressly out of Project 2025, there are plans for how to remove top military leaders, or to try to remove top military leaders who might oppose that type of action, and put in
And people are fleeing. People are fleeing the FBI. People are fleeing the Justice Department. I would imagine people are fleeing the military. But Brian,
flee those places, that's a problem.
But who makes up the United States military? Americans.
Yeah.
And do we not know yet, Brian, that 50% of the American people support the authoritarian agenda of MAGA? They vote for it. They at least tolerate it. Hey, you want to pull back? They are willing to close their eyes to it and to vote for it.
Here's the question. How does he sell it? Because I do not believe that the majority of people in America support that agenda. I think the majority of the people in America are suffering and support the person who talks to them about how things could change, even if there are no promises attached to it and no policies attached to it. The Democrats say they're changing and people don't feel it. Trump comes in and says he's going to make change, and people are hopeful on that.
Yeah, and dictator, he will support the lower classes and lift them up. That's what he's going to say, and then half the military, or enough of the military, would come out.
People support authoritarianism. I don't know how many people in the military, in the rank and file, but also the middle ranks is important too, because even if he purges top ranks, what middle ranks do is important. The fact that we're talking about the possibility that an American president would purge military, not based on speculation, but based on things he has said, is scary. It is absolutely. I mean, I don't do, I've told my classes many times, I don't do speculation on Trump. I go to things he said that come out of his mouth.
Correct.
Of his supporters' mouths, and there's scary stuff there. Absolutely.
And it's not, would members and units of the military support authoritarianism? It's the wrong question. Do they oppose it enough, given the things they clearly support in the Trump and MAGA agenda? And that is what makes me scared. And that's why Freedom House ranks our democracy so low.
Here's another thing.
One of the weakest democracies in the world.
I think we'd have to count on the press to change their minds, and I'm not willing to count on the press for anything right now, in terms of really getting messages out to people that would change their minds. A Walter Cronkite could go on for 20 minutes and potentially move the American people. There's not only nobody like that, but there's nobody who wants to be like that at this point.
And nobody who can in this digital age, right? Like, we have cuckoo birds, putting things on TikTok called "Come Together," whatever that means, and how do you control these people?
Resemble that cuckoo bird.
Yeah. I think we need to look at South Korea. It's There's warnings there. There are lessons for how to prevent aspiring, or what is it that Finkelstein calls them, wannabe dictators,
Yeah.
from achieving their ends. Dictators increasingly come to power through democratic means, and it requires democratic institutions
Absolutely.
and processes to stop them, but ultimately it requires the people to stop them from achieving those goals. And South Korea is providing us the playbook for how to do that. Um, I'm concerned that we're not going to get the lesson.
So let me change the subject here. Maybe we can close out on this one. I'm concerned about that, but I think we are definitely going into a what if future on the U.S., and I'm kind of in a wait and see and push against it posture. I think the thing that we don't talk about enough is what can go into the big picture category of human security. Not
Yeah,
any one country, not any one issue, but things that amount to migration, including refugees, and healthcare, especially for things like pandemics and environment. And these are things that are harming people around the world. I mention them together because I think they absolutely go together. Refugees play
sometimes it
into
gets CEOs killed.
exactly.
Mhm.
Refugees play into the political situation everywhere. We talk about it in the U.S. It's centered to our politics, but we caused a lot of the refugees. Is the thing we don't hear. Our
Are you
policies.
suggesting that capitalism has brought discontent?
No, I was suggesting actually that imperialism caused discontent. But if you want to say capitalism caused
No,
discontent,
it's your course.
I disagree with you on capitalism and its discontents, a course that I teach very specifically. But yeah, we've got
American capitalism in the age of globalization, fostered by William Jefferson Clinton, has brought a lot of discontent.
and starting in
How's
the
that?
early 70s and before.
Yeah,
It's bad. And what we did in Latin America in the past 50, 60 years is
yeah,
creating refugee situations
yeah.
now that go back to us. But then also, you've got healthcare. We now have potentially people moving into primary healthcare positions in the United States who will be influencing the CDC, who will be
Yeah,
influencing healthcare
yeah.
around the world. And the world counts on the CDC. It's the central organization. And we got people who don't believe in vaccines.
We
We,
have people who are urging everyone to drink raw milk when that raw milk is contaminated with a deadly bird flu.
here's my biggest fear right now that I think is incredibly likely is we take out vaccine requirements in
Yeah.
schools for
Yep.
kids. Poor kids stop getting smallpox and
Yep.
polio
Yep.
vaccines before, but they'll need it if we
And
take
then
out
smallpox and polio mutate so that the vaccines are no longer effective. And
and
then
then
we're back into Charles Dickens.
and the whole world, but the U.S. is not immune to this. And
No.
then throw on top of that climate and climate disasters.
And then we get new malarias.
Right, no one is doing enough about. You get new malarias, but also you get coastlines that are disappearing,
You're
and you
right.
get arable land where
Yep.
people are fleeing and
And then
islands.
more refugees and migration. Yep.
Exactly, and more disease, and it all feeds together. And wow, I don't feel good for the generations we're teaching right now.
Well, maybe we'll do some episode. Like we'd have to break that down, I think, into a few different discussions. Maybe like a 3-part series on. Uh, we'll call it Brian's discontent.
If I'm the only person on this podcast who cares about it, we're in trouble.
We're in real trouble.
We're in enormous trouble.
Yeah. Well, folks, it is our hope that we will have some, after the new year, knowledgeable guests who are themselves South Korean and expert on South Korean, Kurdish and expert on Kurdistan, um, and maybe we should find folks who could talk about um, the relationship between infectious disease and conflict and discontent and climate change and
Yeah.
that stuff. Those would
No,
be other
I think those would be
interesting
good shows.
topics.
And
Yeah.
then, of
Well,
course, war on Israel and Ukraine as the situations change
yeah.
significantly. and other places in
Sure.
the world.
Well, that should wrap up this episode of the World Discord podcast. And unless something dramatic happens, we will be taking a break until after the new year. Um, thanks for launching this podcast, Brian. I think
Yeah.
we've had good discussions. I think it's been valuable.
Thank you, Joel. As we said in the first one, you've been bugging me for a year or two to do this, and I'm very glad
3.
we did it. Oh, yeah. I was trying to make you sound good. You had to one up at one
3
point.
years. Yeah.
But I am pleasantly surprised that we have been able to continue it, and I think this is
Me
something
too.
we can easily do into the future. And hopefully, it's been informative for our listeners. Thank you all for listening. Have a great holiday, whatever holidays you celebrate, and a great New Year.
And please like and share this podcast with others. The more listeners, the better. We hope that this is useful, at least in shedding some light on conflicts around the world, and like we say, trying to go deeper than you would hear on regular news coverage. Thank you to David Endless for producing this, putting it together, and we'll see you all in 2025.
Great. Take care, all.